Hey everyone, how y'all doing? And welcome back to Theonopolis. Finally, after 3 weeks, we are back and we are starting off a little bit small by basically finishing off the river rapids and then also building up the queue for the river rapids. So we are starting off actually with building the granaries for the last section of the river rapids. And if you haven't watched the earlier episodes on Theonopolis or the river rapids, basically the idea for the river rapids was that they are like themed surrounding farmland because they are in the, well, I call it the outskirts area of Theonopolis, because Theonopolis really is just, the idea is just actually that's just a giant city. Well, not a giant city, but just a city in ancient Greece. And well, with the outskirts area, of course, there needs to be farmland to sustain the whole city, and that's how the river rapids were born. And yes, it's a little bit of a weird concept, but I really enjoyed building it. So we are starting off by building some granaries because, well, you have a lot of farmland and a lot of grain, and that needs to be stored somewhere. Even though this doesn't make sense because you want grain to be stored at, let's say, the driest possible place, because otherwise it spoils very quickly. So yeah, it's not the most realistic place for like farmlands, or at least for storage, because again, it's a very wet area because of the river rapids. But in a way, it also works a little bit, I would say, because it just, well, it just looks great. But yeah, the granaries look a little bit strange, but that's, I actually used Assassin's Creed Odyssey as a reference for these granaries, because there are not a lot of like real life granaries that survive, or at least a lot of like ancient Grecian granaries, because unlike, let's say, temples and like really important official buildings, granaries and homes and such are most subject to change because they are just constantly being used. They are not like very static buildings, you know, you add things to them, you destroy things or knock things down. So like, especially with like, let's say, granaries and just other things that have like a more like, I wouldn't say industrial, but just a more like, you know, yeah, let's just say industrial use, you know, by the time, or at least as time progresses, like more technology becomes available, so you're going to like change them. And also they were not built to last, or at least not to last as long as, let's say, temples. So that's why I use Assassin's Creed Odyssey to basically act as a little bit of a reference for buildings, or at least for like non-official buildings. There are a lot of references for temples and such, but not for like, let's say, your run-of-the-mill house. But anyway, so if you haven't watched the river rapids or just Theonopolis in general, as I said, the idea is that it's like set in the outskirts of Theonopolis, but it's also like farmlands. Again, farmlands and, or at least storage of food and water doesn't really go together, but we have so far what made it work. And the idea for the queue and the station is basically that it's just this giant palace, and the queue is like going through the gardens of the palace. And this comes from that in ancient Greece, so far as I know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a historian by any means possible, I'm just doing some little bits of researching online. But from what I know so far, farmlands in ancient Greece had like two sides. Like, you had the more like smaller farms which were owned by, let's say, a farmer, and was just large enough to like sustain his family and maybe sell some off at the markets. And then you had the larger scale farming, which were also usually owned by one family or at least one household. And that's more like, I wouldn't say corporate farming, but just larger scale farming, where, you know, they owned all the lands and probably had like, well, I'm just going to be completely honest, they usually had like slaves just cultivate the farmland. And then, you know, of course, because it's one family that owns all the farmland, they usually are pretty wealthy because, well, let's just say farm or there's foods and such are, well, I think one of the most not the most precious things in the ancient world, but they are probably more of the like bigger income gains words don't work today, but will somewhat work with that. But yeah, a lot of just like exchange trade instead of, well, actual coins. Again, I can be wrong because I am not a historian by any means. I mean, I constantly call myself a squirrel, and sometimes I just say that I have the mind of a goldfish. So yeah, don't take anything I say without like fact checking yourself. Actually, don't take anything anyone says without doing some fact checking yourself. But yeah, so for the palace gardens, well, as I said, it's going to be set in the outskirts of Theonopolis, so it's going to be in a more rural area, which also means that you have a lot more land available, or at least, I don't know actually. This is one thing that always like was a question to me, but back then in like rural areas, did you need to buy the land? This might be a very stupid question, and I don't know. Well, it might be a very stupid question, but could you just build anywhere and just say the land was yours? Like, if no one technically owns it, but then you probably could like get in trouble with, let's say, a king or something. So yeah, let's just move on. But yeah, the gardens are actually huge. And the palace is also kind of huge. I mean, we have like the Midas district also in Theonopolis. And yes, Theonopolis is sectioned off in different areas. And so we have like the harbor area, we have the Midas district, which is the very wealthy district with, actually, it's supposed to have a lot of palaces, but then this palace is actually like almost 5 times the size of the buildings in the Midas district. So I have to, well, I'm going to go into that later on as soon as we finish the outskirts, because, well, again, for anyone who's new here, but I've made a little bit of like a commitment to say I want to finish the outskirts and then move on to a different area, and then, you know, finish Theonopolis area by area instead of like doing small projects everywhere, because that's basically what Theonopolis is right now. There are like rides with the area surrounding them done, and then there are just huge gaps in between. So from now on, I will try to finish the whole area before moving on to the next one. So we are going to be in the outskirts probably for the rest of the week, and maybe even longer. I originally thought that that Theonopolis would be done by the end of the year, but by how much I've built so far, that might not be the case. But we will see where it goes. We will see when my PC just explodes, because it's a huge thing. But yeah, so back to what I originally was talking about, which is the palace gardens, or, well, I say it's a palace, but it's also, well, we all have another palace, which, I mean, it's a little bit of like a narcissistic statement, because I constantly call it my palace, because it's the biggest palace we have in Theonopolis so far, and it's right at the entrance. And if you pause the video at the right moment, you might have just seen it. But yeah, I should probably call this like some kind of like manor or something, to not confuse you guys with the squirrel palace, as I would call it. But yeah, the palace is a little big. As I said, like the Midas district is supposed to be all about the palaces, but all the palaces in the Midas district are smaller than this one. But then also the Midas district doesn't have any palaces that are like stations. So stations are usually pretty big in Planetcoaster. Actually, everything is pretty big in Planetcoaster. Also in Planet Zoo, like just scaling wise, everything is quite big. But yeah, so back to what we're building. So the queue for the river rapids basically goes to the gardens mostly of the palace, and it's going to be a very big contrast between the palace and the surrounding area, because as I said, it's going to be the outskirts of Theonopolis. So there's not going to be, well, this is going to be the only palace in the outskirts. So I've already built a little bit for the next video, and there's going to be a huge contrast between the palace, and just everyone living outside. Because I didn't want to make like the, let's say, how can I easily say this, but I didn't want to make a very like poor area or like slums, but compared to the palace, it kind of looks like the slums. But yeah, we're going to go into that in the next video, which is probably going to be like Friday or something. I don't know. We'll see when the next video gets uploaded. Also, I'm happy that you stuck by me with, well, actually, this is more of my normal upload schedule. Like, I usually don't post on like the weekends. And now also with the flu, finally getting rid of that, because that has been going on since Osaru. Like, back and forth between I want to build things and I want to curl up into a ball and never wake up. That sounds very dark, but with that I mean I just never want to leave my bed when, you know, flu and everything. But with the palace, because I'm getting off track so many times here, it should be almost a record. But as I said, it's going to be mostly in the gardens, and again I take a lot of references from Assassin's Creed Odyssey, because that's a little bit easy to just have Assassin's Creed Odyssey, well, not playing on my other screen, but just having some reference pictures of Assassin's Creed Odyssey and the buildings there. And as I said, like houses and let's say granaries and more like industrial buildings don't really survive. Palaces have a little bit more of a chance to survive just because of like the grandeur and just that they are mostly official buildings, or like, you know, things that you want to preserve. Like just your ordinary home, you usually just only have like the foundations of them. But yeah, the gardens were really just built to like create this like us versus them, like that kind of feel of like you want to separate your house as much from the, this sounds really just wrong, but it is the case. You want to separate your garden from the working man outside. You want to basically create your own idyllic world where you don't get bothered by the outside world and by the actual reality that people need to work. Because I do think that most of like the household that lives in this palace slash manor probably don't have to do a lot of labor. Well, besides like maybe like administrate, well, not administrate. Words today are not going to be my greatest asset because, well, they never are. But yeah, besides like doing like administrative duties, there's probably not going to be a lot of like actual labor work done. But yeah, so the palace gardens or manor gardens are basically just like a little bit more built to basically just say, look at how much money I have that I can afford to have all this. Because that basically is what the entire idea behind this gardens were. Just showing off a lot of wealth. Because as I said, I wanted to basically separate the palace slash manor from everyone outside. So by making that contrast as huge as possible, it's really it's easy to see then. Because this might be spoiling for the next episode, but I will probably forget that I've talked about this for the next episode, because I have the mind of a goldfish, or not the mind of a goldfish, but more the brain and memory of one. But in the palace, if you again pause the video at the right moments, you can see like the marble pillars that you usually see with like temples and such, and then all the outside homes basically only have like wooden pillars and maybe stone at the most, but not marble pillars, because that's very expensive, and you as a, let's say, a working class man aren't really able to afford that unless you're really well to do. But I doubt that the people outside of this palace really do. But then again, also like the outskirts are going to be the, well, I built like an Oracle ride, and I want to have it somewhere, and the Outskirts is the only logical place to have it. So there's going to be a very big contrast between Manor House, basically the working man's part of the area, and then you have the Oracle, which is going to be very like officially like religious type of building, so a lot of temples. So there's going to be just a huge contrast between two areas with just a lot of marble and wealth being shown off, and then you have the working class quarters. And I'm actually very surprised by the working class quarters. Like, when you build something, it's really easily to get stuck with a certain thing, like with certain, let's say, building pieces. And well, the Outskirts just have, as I said, that big contrast, so it's just I had to completely change what I built. But again, Assassin's Creed Odyssey helps a lot. And it's maybe a little bit weird, but I have Assassin's Creed Odyssey myself, but I don't start it up because playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey or just looking for like a reference to use and then also building Planco will probably make either my PC cry or just explode. Because yes, we are getting like 10 frames or in between 10 and 20 frames in Theonopolis just because of the huge scale that everything is right now. So yeah, in a way I'm probably going to be happy when we finish Theonopolis, but also in a way it's going on for a year now, so it's going to be a little bit, I wouldn't say weird to have finished it, but also just a little bit similar to Ozaru, where it just feels like I'm missing something. But I do know that when Plan Zoo gets released, it's probably going to throw a huge wrench into like the schedule of Theonopolis, so I'm also already, well, not really preparing for it with like videos or like building things, but more like mentally preparing for that, which might not be the best thing to do, but I already know that I'm probably going to, like the first week when Plan Zoo is released, I'm probably not going to really go into Theonopolis because I have the mind of a squirrel. I get really easily distracted, so throwing a new game into my face, I will probably almost forget Theonopolis then. But now we are at a slightly interesting part of building the queue or the gardens, because now we're actually at like the garden part, and this is just another show of wealth in a way, because actually also realistically these kinds of plants would probably be very expensive to keep. Like the just normal green plants and trees and such are relatively easy to keep, but like flowers, if you think about it, are very delicate, and so having like huge gardens full of flowers is going to be very expensive to keep it all looking pristine and pretty, because do one thing wrong and just the entire garden dies. Well, except for all just the normal green plants. So this is just another show of like the person who owns the palace or the manor has so much money that he can probably keep like an army of gardeners, or realistically it will probably be slaves, because well, that's just the honest thing. Like that would probably be like done by either slaves, or if he was really wealthy, maybe some people who he employed who had actually like very like big knowledge on plants and such, but mostly probably done by slaves, because that's how most, well, not most, but probably a lot of hard labor was done. Like words today are a little bit missing in my head, but I'm not going to skip around the fact that yes, slavery was a huge thing back then. But again, I'm not a historian by any means, so I'm basically using my very limited amount of knowledge on the fact. And if you guys ever know like, oh, you're saying this but it actually is this, please do say it down below in the comments, because as I said before, well, for all the new people, you probably didn't hear this, but for everyone who has already heard it, I always say, please, if I make some mistake, do point it out so that we can both learn from it. Or just I can learn from it, because otherwise I would just be wallowing around in ignorance, and that isn't helping anyone. And it might also make the buildings more accurate. Like, Theonopolis by no means is historically accurate, because most of the homes that are like pretty and just like the main street buildings and the Midas district buildings, they have a little bit more like Renaissance architecture also to them, because otherwise they would be kind of boring. Or at least in my opinion they would be kind of boring, because most actual Grecian buildings were blocks, and I don't like building blocks. So again, if I'm ever wrong, please do point it out, unless I really say that it's not historically accurate. But when it comes to like actual like facts and such, please do point it out. But anyway, so as I said before, the gardens are just a huge show of wealth, because the owner of this mansion or palace, or I'm going to, well, so far I've called this building all of the terms to basically refer a big magnificent building to. But the owner has so much money that he can basically keep up with this huge garden filled with flowers and such. And it's just, well, as I said before, a huge show of wealth. Which again, in the next video is going to make this building a very big contrast with everything surrounding it. Well, except for the more like, well, Oracle themed stuff that's in the background. So yeah, this is basically where I got stuck, because once I start doing something, I sometimes kind of get lost in it. So I was just building these gardens for, well, the rest of the video actually, because it's a pretty large area that I set off as the gardens. Though not all of it is going to be like filled with flowers, because that would be a little bit extreme. We also have the flat right, which is called the meadow, or Persephone's meadow, which is completely filled with flowers, because Persephone is the goddess of flowers, if I'm correct. So it's also like the queen of the underworld, so that's again like the perfect combination, like queen of the underworld. And that's a quite terrible background story, because, you know, most Greek gods couldn't really keep their hands to themselves. But let's move on. But flowers and basically that. Yeah, perfect combination. There are more of those weird combinations where you're like, why did that god have those two things that are almost completely opposite? I also say the same with like Poseidon and like earthquakes and the sea. Like earthquakes, you just think of earth, not water. Yeah. For anyone who's new to Theonopolis, sometimes the rambling goes off to mythological stuff, because then I just, you know, I have the mind of a squirrel. I probably shouldn't try and just make it look, well, explain it anymore, because by now I think you guys expected a little bit of like, a little bit weirdness to the videos. Well, not really weirdness, but just that sometimes the rambling just goes off in weird directions. But back to the gardens, because, well, I don't know why I put that there. Probably just to create a little bit of like difference or variation in the gardens, because otherwise this area would just be completely filled with flowers. So just having a little bit of variation in what is in the gardens. And that's also the reason why the rest of the gardens isn't as flowery, because, you know, having variation in the gardens also just works a little bit better than just having one thing that just completely consumes an area the size of these gardens. So yeah, it was a little bit of like, alright, how can I make this different without it contrasting too much with the rest of the gardens. Because you still need to build like a cohesive everything, but having everything be completely the same is going to be quite boring, and especially with like all the flowers is going to take a year. So yeah, it's also a little bit more realistic that not every part of the garden is filled with flowers. So we are now building. Actually, I had no idea what this was. I just thought like, alright, I need something that's different, a little bit more stony and such. And then I just thought like, alright, so what could I make this? And I still have no idea. I just thought it was pretty. So yeah, that sometimes just goes to show like some things are not realistic because they are prettier. So you first see me place wooden pillars, or wooden, well, they are wooden pillars, but as I said, I wanted a huge contrast between this palace and, well, everything outside. So no wooden pillars. Kind of a wooden canopy though, because in ancient Greece kinda gets a little bit hot on some days, so if you can get into the shade, that already helps a lot. Also, plants actually also help a lot with like keeping things cool, because just not just the shade, but I think also in a way plants just give off coolness, or it works in a weird way that I can't really explain right now, but plants do keep things cool, and then also just keeping in the shade keeps yourself cool. So if you had the chance to basically build, let's say, a canopy or such in a place where it could get really hot, you would probably do it, because you don't want to basically get a heat stroke. And that was the idea later on for this place, because as I said before, when I started this place, I had no idea what I wanted to build here. And I'm going to be completely honest with that. Sometimes you just start building and you have, or at least I have no idea what I'm building. I just think like, alright, this, I've seen this somewhere and I don't know where anymore, but it looks nice, so let's try and see what I can make of it, and then sometimes good things come out of it. So this is basically, it first started as like, oh, I maybe want to build like a fountain or something, but now it's just a little bit of like a resting area. And this is another thing of like everything in Theonopolis and just Planco is huge, because I wanted to build some benches, and yeah, it wasn't the easiest thing to build, because again, every piece in Planetcoaster is huge. So I'm hoping that when Plan 2 releases, there are also going to be a little bit more smaller pieces. And now it just turned into some kind of, how would I say this? Just a little bit of a resting place with a nice statue of Poseidon, because why not? Like this, the gardens is actually like, it works as a cohesive thing in when you look at every aspect of the gardens. But if you look at one aspect of the gardens and then look at the next one, it's kind of like, alright, why is this here? So right now, on the other side from the, well, Poseidon statue, there was this area, and I, again, didn't know what to do with it, because I first thought like, alright, let's make the rest of the gardens a little bit more like rural. But as I said, I wanted to have a lot of contrast between the palace and its gardens and just the working man's quarters outside. So this is not realistic, because this will probably just, why would you have this? But it's basically, it has the shape of an ancient Grecian temple, or at least, you know, it has the pillars and such. But it's, I basically thought of like, oh, this is going to be like an outside banquet area or something. Like just a place to entertain guests outside of the home. And in a way it works. It's just like, you, from the outside you can really see this building, and you can really just see like it's almost completely marble, which is already very expensive. And then it's also a completely nonsensical building, so like the more a building makes no sense as to why it is there, the more it just looks, well, it can look ridiculous, but it can also look like there was just a lot of money spent in it. So having this like outside banquet area, even though the queue doesn't go into it, it just works in a way. And I didn't build like an actual like banquet table and such, because I just thought like, alright, let's make it so that the area could be used as like a banquet area or just a gathering area. But I didn't actually fill it with like actual tables and such, just because otherwise it would look a little bit too busy. Because again, with buildings, or not again, but with buildings in Planetcoaster, there is, well, not just in Planetcoaster, in buildings in general, there is the fine line of making things pretty and making things pretty but way too busy. Or basically what I'm saying is sometimes less is more. Though I usually am very close to that fine line in between those two. But yeah, so I basically just had these like, they're not curtains, but they're basically just accessories and just decorations for if there was like a party. And then I just thought like, alright, let's add these bushes, sink them into the ground so it looks like flower petals, because like you usually see those with like parties and religious things, that it would just be flower petals scattered all over. Also, I didn't build this on screen, but there is this little well in the, well, on the other side of the gardens, because, well, you needed to gather all your water for the household from a well or a river. And of course, because this is a palace, so the owner is very wealthy, he can afford to have his own well. Because again, it's a little bit of like, well, it's also time management, because the water is closer to you, so you don't need to have like a lot of time spent on gathering water if it's closer to you. But then again, the family members of the owner of this house would probably not gather water. Probably the servants would do that, so it's just a little bit of like, again, us versus them mentality. Which, yeah, I might have gone a little bit extreme with that in this case. Because basically this entire house is almost self-sustaining. Well, except for like, let's say, buying bread and other like, well, food. But then the owner of this household owns the farmland, so probably owns a lot more than the farmlands. Maybe like also the baker and such. So it's almost completely self-sustaining. But that's basically going to be it for today. I wanted to start off a little bit smaller, and in the next video we are going to build a little bit more of the workers area, so it's going to be a huge contrast between what we build now and what we build in the next video. Also, I do have the idea to basically do a little bit of like a walkthrough of what we're going to do in Theonopolis. Just because I know that there are a lot of new people around here now, so that might be a useful video so that you guys know like, oh, this is Theonopolis and this is what we're going to do, because we're basically not going to build huge rides anymore. There's going to be maybe like a kiddie coaster, go-kart track, and maybe some flat rides. But the rest of Theonopolis is filled already a little bit, so it's basically mostly going to be finishing rides. So yeah, let me know if you want to see like a walkthrough of like how Theonopolis is going and what we're going to do. But that's again going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, I hope to see you back in the next one. Don't forget to hit the like button, because it does help out, and I have no idea how it does help. It's probably just the interaction or something, or engagement. I have no idea how YouTube works, but I don't think anyone has right now. So yeah, just don't forget to hit the like button, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoyed the return to Theonopolis even though I rambled probably a little bit more than I usually do, because sometimes I have a little bit structure to the videos. But this video was just me being very excited to just be back, and then I lose all focus and basically coherence. So again, hope you all enjoyed the video, and I wish you all an amazing day. I am a little bit still finishing the ride by basically building the entrance, but that's going to be it. So I'm going to repeat this for the third time because I thought that the outro would be a lot longer, but it isn't. So again, hope you all have a wonderful day, and that's it for the river rapids. Next video is going to be the worker quarters or working quarters. Yeah, just a more rural area. So, bye bye.